armed with modern weapons. Within 1 year after the Battle of Adwa, according to Pankhurst's records, the number of people armed with modern weapons taken from all the European powers who were trying to gain influence in Ethiopia reached 600,000, fully armed. That is the army that Emperor Menelik used to conquer the whole of southern Ethiopia. So the ball game was drastically changed by Emperor Menelik. Up to Menelik, every emperor, every king in Ethiopia had to negotiate with the other nationalities because they didn't have enough power really to completely dominate the nation, and so they had to make compromises, basically, make deals, make through marriage and through other techniques to try and merge the people they governed with the royal house of Ethiopia. So marriages were all political, all of them. No daughters of monarchies were just married away. They were married for the purpose of forming alliances. So many Oromo groups were united to Ethiopia through marriage. Welaga was, Shoa was, Empress Menen was from Wollo, from the very people that Emperor Haile Selassie fought against, and so on. So these were the kind of methods of unification that were being employed. But on the other side, it was also devastating. It was also basically eliminating Oromo culture and forcing people to become part of the dominant culture of Ethiopia. If you can adopt the dominant culture and language, you change your name, you're okay. You've made it. And there are a lot of people that I knew when I was doing research who told me openly that their names are Oromo names. And that's an unfortunate thing because you can't escape it. You see, that is your identity is revealed through your name. And so one man who's an officer of the army told me, by the time we come to my children's generation, all our names will be Christian names and nobody will know that they're Oromo. And so identity itself was a way of either becoming part of the larger entity or withdrawing from it and retaining a certain amount of your identity. Now, there are, in terms of the, this thing is jumping around. So I will talk a little bit about Arsi. Then, as you know, the Derg took power in 1974, 1974. I was here then. Had come back to Ethiopia to start a new project, a survey of Addis Ababa. Complete survey of the whole city. It was a huge project with 5 graduate students came with me, was four of them Ethiopians, one American. And it was to do a 2-year study, do a sociological study of Addis Ababa. So while I was doing that, the Derg took over, and I had to change course completely. I had to abandon my studies. We left Addis Ababa and went back to America, and I asked the Derg to allow me to come back and finish my research, because I think it's very valuable for Ethiopia to have a survey like that. And the Derg was very simple-minded. They wrote me a 2-line letter that says, ይህ እርስዎ ሊያደርጉት የሚፈልጉ ጥናት አብዮታችንን የሚደግፍ ከሆነ ይፈቀዳል፣ ካልሆነ አይፈቀድም። And I wrote a 2-line letter back to them. ክቡር ጓዶች፣ የጥናቱ ውጤት በቅድሚያ የሚታወቅ ከሆነ ለምንስ ይደረጋል? ዘጋው ጥናቱ $75,000 ተሰጥቶን የነበረ ጥናቱን ለማድረግ ተመልሶ ወደ ፎርድ ፋውንዴሽን ሄደ። የኔ ጥናት ቁጭ ብሏል። And it was actually in the Institute of what is it called? Institute of Social Studies? The research. Huh? No, Ethiopian Studies? No, but there was another one, development oriented. Idea. Yeah, Institute of Development Research. All my surveys were left there, And I was never able to read them or to do anything with them, so all of it was lost, basically. So I said, all right, forget Finne. I'll go back to my my research in Borana. So I gave up my studies. I couldn't come back to Ethiopia. I couldn't go, so I couldn't come back to the Oromo part of Ethiopia. So of the Borana part of Ethiopia. So I went to Kenya and started doing research on the Marsabit Boran, Boran Angam. So for the next, from 74 to 84, I was coming every fourth year to do studies of Oromo culture. I could do a lot of historical research. They knew quite a lot about warfare, about horsemanship, about love of horses, about rules that govern the raising and keeping of horses. They told me, for instance, about the fact that the penalty for killing a horse is gar, the price of a human being. The price of killing a female horse that is pregnant, it is rifens mata, that is unlimited. And so the only thing that you can do is you can have to leave the country. So this is how honored a horse is. Now remember, my first encounter with the Oromo was in Ukkat, horseback riding. Now I come to realize that horses have a tremendously important role in Oromo culture and in Oromo warfare, because their warfare was built partly on the use of the cavalry as a supplement to head-on fighting. So now, crossing over to Kenya, in a way, I had to retool. I had to restructure my studies. I couldn't do a study of Gada because Gada is lost in northern Kenya. Why is it lost? Because the British are ruthless rulers. They are worse than the Ethiopian side. The Ethiopians, at least, they put pressure on people, but only such pressure as people can tolerate. They try to introduce the Gabbar system. And Borana says, what on earth is Gabbar? They said, well, you have to feed the Naftanya who are settling in your midst. You have to pay them part of your income and support them. And they said, well, you mean you're going to become Tisele? We won't. They just abandoned the whole thing and moved over across to Kenya en masse. Huge numbers of Borana. And the British welcomed them, saying these are refugees from Ethiopian injustice. These are the same people who are saying we wouldn't allow Oromo to come to their territory. But now here they are saying they are refugees from Ethiopian injustice. So the Ethiopians were at a loss. They tried to say, bring back, give us our Gabbar. And they went deep inside Kenya to try and take them back. The British said, not on your life, you can't do that. This is international territory. They stopped them. And so they basically gave up on that. But the British also were pretty ruthless and started putting all kinds of pressure on the Borana. Taxes and inflation of prices and all kinds of rules limiting their movement, taking their wells away and using the wells as a way of punishing people. The British were really pretty ruthless. And so they hated that as well. So anytime the British put too much pressure on them, they cross over back into Ethiopia. And so they used the border as a means of negotiating with two colonial powers. They did it very effectively. RC, on the other hand, they didn't have an international boundary to which they can retreat. Borana did. And they used it all the way until the end of the period that I'm studying to take shelter outside of the territory of the government that is exploiting you. So the more exploitative they became, they just crossed over and started living on the other side of the border. So they were straddled across the border. Incidentally, between them, there was a no man's land controlled by Shifta. Who are the Shifta, do you think? They were Tigrayan hunters who were they went after elephant tusks. They were very rich. By selling elephant tusks, they were making a lot of money, and they were not governed by Ethiopia or by Kenya. They had their own territory. I mean, a no man's land that's controlled only by the Shifta. And both of them, the Kenyan government and the Ethiopian government, attempted under Emperor Haile Selassie during his early period of rule, whilst he still was Rastafari. They attempted to jointly take campaign against the Shifta, and they were defeated by the Shifta. The Shifta were fully armed, but they made deals with the Borana because they needed food. So the Borana would give them food, and they would give them weapons. And so that was that was the way in which the Shifta and the Borana managed to retain control of the territory, and that became the way Borana survived this very difficult period of transition. And so on the other side of the border, most of my research was not on Gada, but on ecological adaptation. So I changed my strategy completely. If I can't study Gada, what else can I study? Well, there are two famines in the territory. As you know, 1973 in Ethiopia and throughout Africa was a disastrous year. There was a big famine. You remember the Wollo famine. It was just as devastating on the Kenyan side. It was a very painful experience for them. And so I was there during that year. I was there also in 1984, another big famine, equally destructive. So in both situations, what I studied was how do people survive? What indigenous knowledge do they have that allows them to survive? And I learned a tremendous amount of information about their knowledge of plants and how they use them to survive. Truly amazing. There's one plant called safarra. Safarra is an amazing little plant. It's about this big. It has 3 tiny leaves. It has an oily trunk, but no bigger than my arm. And it looks like a nothing plant. And they know it, and they know where to find it, and they know how to use it. And people who don't know the safarra will die of thirst and hunger. The Borana will survive because of their knowledge of that plant. So you dig out this plant. It's in my book, by the way, in the new book. I have the pictures of the safarra and of people using it. And what they do is they dig up the root, and the root is about this big in diameter and about this long. So it's a lot of food. I mean, it can feed a family. And so they just slice that up and squeeze it. It's fairly sweet, but it's very, very full of nutrition. And they use that to feed themselves and their small animals, goats and sheep. They just slice it up and put it on a pan, and they come and feed on that. And that way they survive the two great famines. But that's just one of hundreds of plants that they have. I identified 400 plants, scientifically identified, 400 plants that they use for purposes of survival under difficult circumstances. So my next book is going to be titled A Pastoral Ecosystem Field Studies of the Borana and Gabra of Kenya. It's all about pastoralism, about adaptation to drought, about migration, about the use of two different kinds of livestock, cattle in the case of Borana and camels in the case of the Gabra, living in very rich environment on top of Marsabit Mountain, and the other group of the Gabra living in a desert called Chalbi Desert. So that book was finished in 1991, but 1991 so something else happened. The liberation of Ethiopia, the end of the dirt. And so I had to drop everything, go back to Eritrea to go and try and help with the rehabilitation of the country. So I was in Eritrea for 24 years after that, and did very little with my Oromo research. The one book that I had completed was suspended. To this day, it has not been published. So now I have an opportunity to go back, come to Ethiopia, finish the book, and publish it. So it will be very different from the other stuff that I have written. But the big one that I've just finished, I went back to the United States for the purpose of finishing the book. It took me 10 years to write the second edition of Gada. The second edition of Gada is very different from the first one. It is essentially the same book. For the first 8 chapters of it are the same thing as what I had written previously, but this time what I did was I updated it. So everything that happened during the next 45 years is incorporated into each chapter. So each chapter has a coda that describes all the things that have happened during the last 45 years, and research done by myself and others. Now others have started picking up research on Gada. this time. You know, there's one that was done on the Gada system of Gabra by Ivan Tori, another by John Hinnant, a student of Don Levine, who is my colleague, and he persuaded one of his students to go do a study of Gada after my book was completed, study of Gada Munguji, and so on. So once Gada was known, scholars were beginning to sort of pick up the information and build on it. So what's new about the new book? One big thing that was discovered during the intervening period is I wrote about the astronomy calendar of the Quran. It's a very complex calendar. It took me a lot of effort to try and understand it, and I have to go back to study an elementary textbook in astronomy in order to understand what the elders were telling me. It was very, very difficult. I had a teacher by the name of Arero Ramata. He was the advisor to the Gada Council, and he was in demand in Boran. People had to send him a white horse and a white outfit in order to consult with him. So this is a consultancy that is well rewarded. So I couldn't hold him to myself enough to be able to learn everything that I wanted to learn from him. So I told him, let me take you to Vilvinde, and he'll show you the big city. And said, what is the Vilvinde that I would be interested in? He said, well, for instance, there are the palaces of the emperors. You may be able to see that. He said, which emperor? Haile Selassie did nothing, so I don't want to see his palace. Menelik's palace I want to see, he says. So I brought him over, got permission to have him see the emperor's palace. But my purpose in bringing him here was to have him here with me for an entire month in order to be able to, full time, in order to be able to understand the astronomy calendar. So what we did was every night we'd go up to Topo. Down here you can't see anything because there's so much artificial light that half of the sky is not visible. So he goes up and down with his aurora, which is a straight stick, and he would hold it like that. I see with my right ear and right eye, and he looks with his left ear, and he points it to a particular place, and he says that pair of stars is called Busan, and that one is called Al-Gajima, and that one is called Bakalchidiko, and that one is called Bakalchigudo, and so on. All the stars he showed me visually. That's just the beginning. That's simple. That's not too complicated. Then what he said is, each day, well, actually, each month, a star appears on the same horizon with the new moon. So the observation you have to make is the new moon. Which star is appearing on the horizon with it? That's called Aha. So it's conjunction of the moon and the stars. That happens sequentially. First day it comes with the first star, the next day it appears with the second star, and so on up the line. Month by month, exactly the same thing happen again. First it appears with the first star, and then with the second star, and so on up the line. Okay? So Borana have figured out a very complex calendar that combines the movement of the moon and the movement of the Earth around the sun. There are two cycles. The moon's rotation is called, what is it called? I don't remember, 27 days. And the other one is 29 and a half days. So these are the 2 months that they use, and they use permutation. Permutation is a mathematical principle, which means in measuring time, this is getting complicated now. In measuring time, you use not a straight list of names of days and months, but you use 2 series, unequal series. And the 2 unequal series, if you have a cog of wheel cog like this, which has notches in it, and you have different notches on the 2 wheels. Let's say this has 5 notches and this one has 7 notches. Combine them, you rotate them. What happens is that after 7 rotations of the small wheel and 5 rotations of the big wheel, the 2 sides will mesh. This is called permutation in mathematics. Because of that, there's a mathematician emeritus professor of mathematics at a Catholic university in America by the name of Martha Asher, who has written about the mathematical ideas underlying the chronology and time reckoning system of Qur'an. This is a woman who knows nothing about Aroma, just reads my book and says, aha, these people are using mathematics. The book is called Mathematics Elsewhere. Mathematics outside of the Western world. And I can't understand what she has written for the life of me. I mean, I have to get mathematicians to try and interpret what she's saying. But in any case, I asked her to please write me a paragraph to say briefly what it is that you have discovered. And she said, that's all right, it's very simple. It's just that they are using a mathematical principle to keep track of time without written records, right? And so everything that they do is done with pairs of lists. In the case of the Gada chronology, they have two items that they keep track of. They list the Gada classes, the Luba. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, one generation, 40 years. Okay, they list them like that. Second generation starts at 6, 7, 5. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Right? Two rows. Keep going like that for 8 generations. That is the Gada chronology. Okay, now, while Arura Mata can list the Gada classes this way or this way. Now, try to do that without writing it down on paper. It's very, very difficult. So, Oromo have two ways of reckoning time. One is by Luba. The other is by Gogesa. Gogesa means the vertical column. On this chart, the vertical column is called a Gogesa. The Luba are the sequential classes, generation sets that come sequentially. Okay? So then they have 7 and 5 names for Gada. The 5 names are the five Lubas that come to power in succession. The 7 names are called Makawasa Luba. 7 names. Why do they apply 7 names to a chronology that consists of five rows? Permutation. Same principle. So, Arora Mata has a way of describing these two principles underlying the Gada chronology. He says, one is called Akka Makawasa Wali Rafudan, horizontal line. So the vertical line is called Akka Makawasa Wali World Alami. Okay? One is the generational sequence, the other is the Gada sequence, horizontal. Permutate those two, what happens? After 5 rotations of Luba and 7 rotations of Makawasa Luba, the names of the Makawasa mesh back again. It comes back to all the 5 Gogesas, it comes back to the same Gogesa. When it does, that is the end of history. That is the time when whatever happened 360 years ago will happen again now. History is cyclical. Now, you may think that this is a foolish idea, but it's not. It's a brilliant idea. And so if whatever happened 8 generations ago is going to happen again, what do you have to do? You have to do one of two things. If what was done by that ancestor is a good thing, and you had did good things for your people, you try to repeat it. You have an obligation as an Abagada to repeat the good things that happened with your 8th generation ancestor. And you have an obligation if he did bad, if he lost wars, if he violated the laws, like Dawe Gobo did. Dawe was a lawmaker, a great lawmaker. And he was also very ruthless in terms of the way he administered the laws. And so he's both good and bad. But in any case, you have to avoid the bad and follow through with the good. So if it's bad, then you have to do 2 things. You have to obey the laws, the ethical standards strictly. You have to make all the sacrifices necessary in order to avoid the evil things that will be repeated unless you do penance, unless you earn forgiveness, unless you do sacrifice. And in order to sacrifice, you must do so with a clean heart. If you don't, the sacrifice will not be of any use. And so here is the Gada chronology, which like the Gada system itself, is also governed by very complex ideas. So I will stop at this point, and we can pursue each of the topics that I have raised in any depth that you choose. I hope you will ask me as difficult questions as you choose, and I'll try to answer them. But more importantly, I would like to use this occasion to say that the knowledge that I have gathered and many others have gathered after I did my research is endless. It is a gold mine, and it is an unlimited gold mine. You can go on digging and you'll find new things at every turn. This is why I have kept going for 40 years, for more than that, for 50 years. And so my hope is that the baton will be passed on to another generation, a younger generation. My book is dedicated to the Kube and the Kero generations. They're the ones who will have to carry on and to make Ghana a reality that is going to be to empower the people anew. And in the end, the message I have in the book is simply this: borrowed institutions are dangerous. Borrowed institutions are weak. When they are violated by rulers that are greedy, people cannot stand up to them because they do not own the culture in question. And so a system that is built on indigenous knowledge and ancient traditions and ancient ethical systems, people will fight to keep them. But if the whole system is borrowed, it's like a jacket that you're wearing. You wear it for as long as you need to, and if it's uncomfortable, you just throw it away. So the same thing can happen with culture. People will discard their culture if it is inconvenient. That is, if it is a borrowed system. But if it is based on existing, historic, ancient values and traditions, then they will have a staying power. They will have a capacity to endure the hostile forces that come to power. I'll give an example for Emperor Haile Selassie. Emperor Haile Selassie was very conscious of the fact that he is accosted by two forces. He wanted to be a modernizer, but he also was aware of the fact that there are deep historical roots in Ethiopia, which if you lose them, you lose your throne, you lose everything. And so when he came to innovate the laws of Ethiopia, he told René David, one of the great French legal thinkers, to come to Ethiopia and write the civil code for the country. Now, that's a borrowed institution, isn't it? It has nothing to do with the Ethiopian tradition. But he stopped short. He said, you can write about everything except Rist. There's nothing in the civil code that has to do with Rist. Why Rist? Because Rist is a fundamental concept in Amhara culture. Very fundamental. I've been to Gojam country at a time when a colleague of mine by the name of Alan Hogan, who spent 2 years studies the culture and social organization of the Gojam Amhara. And I went on muleback to see him in his place. It was an amazing experience. Deep inside Gojam country, to a place called Faraspet Mikael. And I asked them, why is it called Faraspet? They said, because that's how we and I heard about how the villages are organized. You know how they are organized? Every village has a tower, which is built by the founding father, Wannaobat Nabibal, Wannaobat. Next to him are the next generation. They are called Minzirabat. Okay? If you can prove that you are a descendant of any of these people, we Wannaobat, we the Minzirabat, if you can prove, then they have to give you a piece of land. You have a right. If you can't, there's no way that you can acquire land by any means at all. But what used to happen was that the Masafint of Gojam used to invent genealogies and say እንወለዳለን እያሉ መሬት ይወስዳሉ ከሚገባቸው በላይ። በዚህ ምክንያት ምን ይላሉ አማራ፣ የጎጃም አማራ በሺህ ዓመቱ ርስት ለባለቤቱ። ትልቅ ኮንሰፕት ነው። It's a fundamental idea. በሺህ ዓመቱ ርስት ለባለቤቱ, which means you can take my land away now, but generation later, a generation or two later, it go back to its rightful owners. And they apply the same seed principle, by the way, to what happened to Walqait. In that case also, they say, Shamatu Rasulullah. So, fundamental constitutional principle, and it's a democratic principle, because it treats every human being equally, but in accordance with the genealogy. As Haile Selassie, when he was founding University College, we ran into a problem. We didn't have a football field. There was a big plot of land right next to the campus of University College, which was owned by an old man who had a little gojo right in the middle of this field. And so they told him to move, because it's going to be the football field of this new college that they're building. So what did he care about it? He said, Resteno Alena Samal, so the emperor would come periodically, he'd say, so this went on for a whole year. And then in the end, this time, the emperor negotiated with him. And he said, so, but the point is that with the Maria, it means that the emperor is governed by a rule that is higher than him, which for a monarchy is a very fundamental principle. Secondly, that the concept of risk is a fundamental democratic principle. And so when I say that Oromo have a unique cultural system that is entirely democratic, it doesn't mean it's unique across all of Ethiopia or Africa. Each culture has its own principles which are fundamental, which have to be studied and understood and integrated into the national system. So if we say that Gada should be incorporated into the national system as the organizing principle for Oromia, I don't think there'll be much argument about that. But if you say that these principles are universally valuable and can be used by the nation as a whole, then why not? But if you do that, you also have to admit that other cultures also have similarly fundamental principles that are democratic, that can be employed to incorporate into the national system. So it becomes then a national enterprise, not just the enterprise of one particular society. And so this is essentially the recommendations I make at the end of my book is that, but I go beyond that to say, I write one chapter titled Gada and the Future of Oromo Democracy. This was very hard, and it required a lot of courage, a lot of daring to write it, because I'm not in a position to write that. The Oromo nation should have written it. But what I offer is simply a series of ideas for debate. Not prescription, but ideas for people to work with. So I've basically written a sketch of a possible constitution, taking all the elements of democratic government from the system that exists among the Borana, but I reorganized all of it into 4 institutions. All of them exist in Borana, but they're not organized in a fashion that can be utilized as a modern democratic system. So the end of the book is simply a design for government that might be employed for the future of the development of Oromo democracy, also correcting the mistakes in it. The generation of mistake is the biggest one. Organizing the Lubas as a generation that is functional. It creates a problem that is incremental. It expands generation after generation. So there's a whole class of people called Ilman Jarsa. Ilmanjarsa means people who were born too late or too early in the system, in which case the Gada cycle expands to accommodate them. The whole system is internally disintegrating, as it were. Only the Ilman Korma, the people are of the appropriate age, are the ones that continue to function properly. But that population is shrinking, whereas the Ilmanjarsa population is expanding. So Gada, as it exists now, has a dysfunctional feature in terms of structure. And also it has a dysfunction because it excludes certain important categories of human beings. Women being the number one problem. Of course, if Gada is going to be restructured and reorganized, reinstituted, the women have to have an equal role in the system as men. But on top of that, there are also classes of people that are part of Oromo society, but they are the marginal part. One is all the crafts people, and all these people are marginal but important for the society, because all the tools that Oromo use are made by these people. And then there are people who are riverine people. The people I saw in Orma are this type of people. Rivers are a problem for Oromo, not just for Oromo, for the entire population of Ethiopia. Rivers are a problem. Amara ይላሉ የሰንበት እንደሆነ ውሃ ውስጥ ውሃ በላው ይላሉ። ውሃ አይደለም የሚበላው አዞ ነው የሚበላው። ማለት dangerous ነው። Crocodile, all the rivers of Ethiopia are infested with crocodiles. Big crocodiles. The biggest crocodiles in the world are the Nile crocodile. About, I think, 14 to 18 feet long. Huge animals. And they're silent hunters. They swim under the water and come exactly where the victim is and leap out from the river, grab the person, spin to cause them to drown, take them deep into the water, and until they become soft and edible. They have no molars. They have only sharp teeth, so that they can only bite off flesh in order to eat. Now, this animal is really dangerous. It's a threat to human life and to livestock. And so because of that, the migration of the Oromo nation across the whole of Ethiopia and Kenya, they had to go deal with the rivers. So if it is a perennial river, somebody has to help you cross it. Otherwise, what do? You go around it. So if you look at the Omo, what the Oromo did was they remained on the left bank of the river all the way to the origin of the river. They went all the way to Showa, across Wallaga, and down to Gibe Kingdoms. At all times, they remained on the left bank of the river. The river flows downward, right? The left bank is the west side of it. As the river circles around through this whole territory, they always remain on one side of it. I'm betting this. I'm not sure. I have to have the help of the geographers to prove this. But Oromo never settled on both sides of a perennial river. If you do, you run into serious problems. The two people become alienated from each other. And that happened in Orma, in Kenya. The people who emigrated to Kenya, they went into two groups, two channels. One group went deep into Somalia and went back and settled on the left bank of the river. The other group went across Borana, straight down, and settled on the right bank of the river. They are called Barareta, and I forget the second name. Anyway, they turned into two completely separate tribes with virtually no relationship between them. The only way they can communicate with each other is through the help of a people called the Pokomo, who are a riverine people. These riverine people existed all across Ethiopia, everywhere, near all the rivers. When there were no bridges, how did people cross the Nile? How did people cross the Awash? How did people cross the Omo? With the help of riverine people who had Tampa, used all manner of means, like inflated animal skins, to help people cross. It was a huge challenge. Entire armies crossed the Nile with the help of Wata, who got these inflated animal skins, and there are sketches of this in all books that the travelers have prepared, which are fascinating. Sahara nobility sitting on top of an animal skin of a bull with an umbrella, and they put all the weapons that they want to carry inside the animal skin in order to stabilize it so that they don't fall off the animal. And the swimmers grab hold of the four limbs of the animal and swim across. Now, how can they cross? Why don't the crocodiles eat them? They know the behavior of crocodiles, and they can manage to get around them. Crocodiles don't like noisy situations because it confuses them. They like silent situations in which the crocodiles have very rough skin, but they have patches, soft patches all over. These soft patches are highly sensitive to motion. So a drop of water that falls on one edge of the river, they will sense it. And they will be able to swim, go under, swim across, and come up exactly where the drop of water was falling. Very precise engineering that's involved in this. So they are silent, they are efficient. You cannot hear them coming at all because they don't make any movement that can be seen from the top of the river. Because their movement underneath the water is extremely elegant and smooth. Their whole body is transformed into a fish-like animal. You know, they come out and they have four limbs, so they can walk, but they're crude walkers. They don't walk very well. But inside the river, they are absolutely silent swimmers. So they are silent hunters. They don't give you any warning. And women who go fetching water are killed very frequently along all the rivers that I've been to. Death in the hands of crocodiles is a very common phenomenon all over these areas. And so what my bet is that I have come up with the notion, I've said, aquaphobic nations. Who are these aquaphobic? Christian Highland, and the Kushites as well who live along the rivers. All of them are dependent on riverine people. Sometimes they are of different races. Like in Somalia, they're all black Bantu people who lived before the Somalis emigrated there and become the people who assist the Somalis to cross the rivers. And in the case of Ethiopia, it's Wata or Waito, as they were called in the past. They were the experts who helped you cross the river because there were no bridges. You had to depend on them to. So I am suggesting to my colleagues in Oromo history to rethink history and see to what extent rivers were a barrier to Oromo migrations, and what they did by collaborating with the riverine peoples to cross the rivers if they needed to, but on the whole they just avoided the rivers. And so if you look at the migration processes from Borana, Arsi, and Guji area, which is the cradle lands, moving northward, what happens? The Omo, they follow the Omo all the way to the Gibe, the final branch, and everywhere they have lived on the left bank of the river. The line, they're always on the south bank of the river. There's only one time when Emperor Susenyos pressured them, the Gabra of Walaga, to cross over to become part of his army. So they crossed over and they vanished and disappeared in the Gojabe population. You only find them in the genealogy. So that if you count the genealogies of Gojabes along the north bank of the Nile, you'll find that their names are Christian names of all kinds, and then finally the 8th generation and then you count all the names. So we know that at a certain point there was a people who crossed over. But if you cross over, it means you are going into another world. You are estranged from your own people, just as the Orma became two people as a result of having settled on two sides of the river. So basically, these are the ideas that I present in the final chapter of my book. As another set of ideas that I'm coming to grips with is that Oromo are a Cushitic people, not Semitic like the northern Highlanders. The Semitic people of Ethiopia, their ancient roots go back to South Arabia. and it's a well-documented history. It's a rich history. It's a rich history that we are proud about. But the Kushites, that's not their heritage. They have another heritage. It is a heritage that links up with the kingdom of Kush of northern Sudan. And through that, with ancient Egypt and the North African, the pre-Arab North African civilizations, the Berber. The Berber are kinsmen of ours, I mean, of the Kushites. So there are two heritages, and both of them deserve attention. Now, what is it that we need to do to dig up the ancient roots of our Cushitic heritage? Well, I am beginning to feel that I have been reading a lot while writing my present book about the kingdom of Kush, which is the heart of which is Meroe. This is a Cushitic civilization that developed in Egypt in the first millennium before Christ. They cover the whole first millennium before Christ, and they go on until the 4th century. The 4th century, the end of the kingdom of Kush, comes about because Ezana of Aksum raided Meroe and destroyed it. So Aksum and Kush clash at that point, but Meroe was at on its last legs, and Ezana made the final blow. Now, what is the connection between Oromo and the kingdom of Kush? Well, it's impressionistic, but my impressions are vivid and unquestionable. Start with the Kalecha. The Kalecha is a peculiarly Cushitic symbol of authority. Peculiarly and unique. The Kalecha is an emblem that is tied to the head with a strap of leather. You see my picture down here. That's exactly how it is. Except they didn't complete the job and give me the rest of it back here. You have to picture it from the back to realize its historic significance. Because what they do is they tie the Kalecha with a leather piece, make a knot here, more or less like the way we tie a necktie here, and then two strips, jirat, that go down to the waist. Those two strips are telling, terribly important. Always photograph an abagada from both sides, front and back, because the back tells a story, a very important story. Every forehead emblem worn by the kingdoms of Kush and by ancient Egypt in pre-dynastic times was that. It's exactly like that. The forehead emblem, except what they use as a forehead emblem is not the Kalecha, but a cobra. Either a cobra or another animal, another bird. So anyway, the symbol of authority is a powerful animal whose symbol is, the cobra is celebrated because the poison of the cobra can kill. So it has power, and that power becomes the symbol of authority. The Egyptians discovered the use of crowns subsequent to that. But the origins of Egypt indicate that there were only forehead emblems. And these forehead emblems are universal among the Kushites and the kingdom of Kush and Egypt. Now, that's just one. All the symbols of authority that you find in Oromia. Ororo, the long staff. That is part of the emblems of power in Egypt and Kush. A short stick like that. The short stick is called boku. The boku is another symbol of authority, and even higher importance than the Ororo. Ostrich feathers, Bali. Balguda is what the thing is called, which is ostrich feather. But when also the authority of the Abagada is called Bali. And when they hand over authority, what is it that they pass on? Balguda. So that's another symbol of authority. And then peculiar to Oromo, but not shared with the Kushite, is the Surerufa, the turban that they wear on the head. That's another symbol of authority. What have I left out? I think, is that maybe one or two. Anyway, in any case, all the symbols of authority have corresponding symbols that look very much like them in the kingdom of Israel. This is not an accident. It can't be. And then I go beyond that to talk about more fundamental archaeological things that concerns the burial practices of the Egyptians and the Oromo. There's one method of burial which occurs among the Oromo and the ancient Egyptians and Kush, but particularly among the kingdom of Kush, is that the burial is done in a form that is reminiscent of the way the baby is born, in a crouching position, bundled up like this, instead of stretched straight as the way the Egyptians buried them in such sarcophagi. The whole body is crouched like a baby is. The most extreme form of that occurs in Orma. Remember, I said Orma are alienated from the rest of the Oromo nation, and yet they preserve some amazing features. The most amazing thing that I found in Orma is that when they bury the human being, it's not just crouching. The head is put between the legs, and the whole thing is bundled up like that, very much like an infant which is in the womb. So you depart the earth the same way that you came into the earth, in a crouching position. And also the burying of the grave also has a peculiarity. You bury the grave, you dig the grave vertically, and then there's a side room that you create, and the earth must not touch the body of the human being, and so it's in that room that they put the body, and then they seal it vertically with sticks and with mud. So all that, the burial systems of the ancient Egyptians and the Kushites and the Oromo have parallels that link them up. So there's a huge area to be investigated that links us not to the Semitic roots in South Arabia, but to the ancient Cushitic roots in the Sudan. Unfortunately, that has been taken up by the black nations of Africa, who have lionized the kingdom of Kush, believing that they are all Negroid. And if you look at them, they are actually half Negroid, the other half look very much like the Kushites. So I claim that there is a big connection here that has to be investigated, and this is going to be, that has to be understood by another generation. So with that, I'll close.